Let me tell you something I could never forget, something that still sends chills down my spine every time I hear an engine revving through the fog. I don't know if anything like this has ever happened to you, but trust me, after hearing this, you'll think twice before boarding a night bus. It all began on a freezing night in Springfield after I'd finished a late shift delivering packages. I've spent years walking those same streets, seeing just about everything. But that night, something made me question what's real. The old folks around town talk about a bus that only shows up when the fog gets thick like a heavy blanket. It comes at exactly 11:33 p.m., and if you get on, you might never come back. Brian, always a skeptic like me, had heard the tale 100 times. But you don't believe until it happens to you. That night, Brian had stayed late on a delivery run. His phone had died, and there wasn't a taxi or a soul in sight. He headed to the bus stop, hoping for any ride that would take him home. The fog was so thick he could barely see his own hand. Then he felt it. Something was coming. The dim lights of an old bus cut through the darkness. If you love terrifying stories, subscribe and turn on the bell. What I'm about to tell you is real. The bus had no route displayed, just a sign that read, "End of the line." And against all reason, Brian stepped on board. He didn't know he had just crossed into a place he might never leave. Inside, the air was thick, like no one had breathed there in years. The foggy windows let in a pale, sickly light, and the silence was so deep, Brian could hear the echo of his own steps on the metal floor. There were only 5 people seated, but they seemed empty, like their bodies were there, but their minds were elsewhere. No one looked at him, no one moved. Only the steady, low hum of the engine broke the unsettling calm. Brian sat near the back, still unsure why he'd gotten on. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe the cold, or maybe something stronger than reason. As he tried to calm himself, he looked at the bus clock. The hands pointed to 11:33 p.m., just like when he boarded. Minutes passed, or so he thought, but the clock didn't move. He reached for his phone, desperate to reconnect with the outside world, but it was dead. Looking forward, he noticed the driver hadn't said a word. He just drove, aimlessly. The streets outside the windows were no longer familiar. Springfield had vanished. Then, a woman 2 seats away began to whisper. Her lips moved, but Brian couldn't make out the words. What he did see was her face, a mix of sorrow and fear. Every word seemed like a plea, but to whom? The air inside the bus grew colder. The fog wasn't just outside anymore. A thin white mist began to seep through the cracks. And at that moment, Brian realized this wasn't an ordinary ride. Something strange had just begun. With every mile, Brian felt something inside him breaking. Time, if it still existed, seemed frozen. He stared at the clock, still stuck at 11:33, trapped in an eternal moment. Outside, there were no recognizable streets, just thick, dark fog swallowing everything as if the world had disappeared. He tried to spot anything familiar, but all he could see were shadows slipping past the glass, shapes that didn't belong, like echoes of things that should never have existed. Inside, the air grew heavier, colder. The figures seated looked like wax statues, unmoving, expressionless. Brian felt an overwhelming urge to speak, to scream, but his voice vanished into the thick air. No one listened. The man in a suit at the front slowly turned his head, locking eyes with Brian. They were empty eyes, lifeless, as if nothing was behind them. Brian swallowed hard and stood up, determined to get answers. He walked down the aisle, his steps echoing like distant calls. He reached the driver's cabin and pushed the door. It was empty. No one was driving. The wheel spun on its own and the bus kept its ghostly course. A chill ran down his spine. Who or what was driving them? When he turned around, the whispering woman was now standing, staring directly at him. Her lips moved faster, as if praying. Brian understood just one sentence. "It's too late. You can't get off." The fog was seeping inside now, and those figures he thought were people didn't seem human anymore. Fear took hold of Brian. There was no doubt now he had stepped into a place where the world's rules no longer applied. He stepped back, trying to return to his seat. but the bus seemed longer, the aisle stretching with every step. As he moved forward, he noticed things on the floor that hadn't been there before. Broken watches, dusty wallets, yellowed photographs. He knelt and picked one up at random. His hands began to shake. It was a picture of him, wearing the same clothes he had on now. On the back, a faded date, April 23rd, that very night. His heart pounded. He looked around for some other explanation, but all he found were more abandoned memories. Each item had a story, a life, but now they were just remnants. Echoes of others who, like him, had once boarded that bus. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the back. He turned and saw on the fogged-up window, written by unseen fingers, "You are next." He gasped for air. He ran to the door, trying to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge. The woman who had been whispering stood beside him now, with a look of pity and resignation. "You have to choose," she whispered. "Stay, or find someone else to take your place." At that moment, Brian understood he wasn't just a victim. He was part of a cycle, a trap, and the only way out was to doom another. Tap the icon of the yellow lamp and stay with us, so together we can uncover disturbing mysteries. The bus stopped abruptly, without warning, in the middle of nowhere. Outside, the fog was so dense it looked like a solid wall, impossible to pass. The door opened slowly, with a screech that chilled Brian's blood. "Now," the woman said, "if you want to leave, this is your only chance." Without thinking, he bolted for the exit, stumbling, his mind trying to make sense of it all. As he stepped out, the fog wrapped around him, almost pulling him back, trying to keep him, but he pushed forward until the bus vanished into the mist, disappearing as if it had never been. Brian collapsed on the ground, exhausted, and when he opened his eyes, he was back on the streets of Springfield, right where it had all started. The cold air hit his face, and the city lights looked normal again. He stood up, still dazed, and walked home, trying to convince himself it had all been a nightmare. But when he looked in his bedroom mirror, something caught his eye. On his neck, a small dark mark, shaped like a circle, something he'd never had before. He touched it, and a shiver ran down his spine. Since that night, every time the clock strikes 11:33, he hears the sound of an engine shutting off outside his house. And though he never dares to look out the window, he knows it's there, waiting, because the bus always returns for those who've been chosen. No matter how well you think you know your city, there are always corners hiding secrets. I used to believe nothing could surprise me, until one night, everything changed. In Detroit, there's talk of an old subway line that's been closed for years. Line 9. They say there was a collapse, that it was dangerous. But others swear that after midnight, if you dare go down to its platforms, the train still runs, and it doesn't come back. David, a young man who worked as an assistant in an accounting office, always ended his days exhausted. That Friday, his boss asked him to go over some last-minute documents. He left much later than usual, with the city almost asleep. When he got to the subway station, he noticed the regular entrances were closed, but a stairway off to the side, unlit and unguarded, was still open. Driven by urgency and desperation to get home, David descended. The air was colder down there, and the feeling of being alone wrapped around him like a damp blanket. At the bottom, an old, nearly faded sign read, "Line 9 Special Service, 12:00 a.m. He thought it might be a forgotten route, maybe some old train. He waited, and right at midnight, a train without lights, screeching with a sound that chilled his blood, stopped in front of him. The doors opened without anyone touching them. If you enjoy horror stories, subscribe and turn on the bell. Because what happened to David could happen to you. He stepped on. He didn't know he had just entered a place where time and reality were about to break. The inside of the train felt like a poorly preserved memory. The cars were lined with old wood, cracked and smelling of mold, as if from another century. There were no screens, no ads, no robotic voice announcing stops. Just an overwhelming silence. David walked down the aisle, glancing at the few passengers seated. There was an old man with a tattered hat, staring out the window, seeing nothing. A woman in a white dress, her head bowed, seemed asleep, but her fingers tapped on her purse in a constant, almost hypnotic rhythm. He sat far from them, trying to convince himself it was just an old train on a forgotten line. He pulled out his phone to look up information, but there was no signal, no Wi-Fi, not even the time would update. He checked his wristwatch. 12 a.m., and it wasn't moving. The train started moving smoothly, as if gliding on something other than rails. David tried to look outside, but there was only darkness, complete blackness, as if the tunnel had no end. The speed increased, and the car shook, but no one else seemed to notice. He tried to talk to the old man. He approached and tapped his shoulder. The man slowly turned his head and said, in a dry voice, "There's no turning back now." David stepped back, his heart racing. The doors were shut tight, with no button to open them. The train kept moving, taking him to a destination he could no longer avoid. And the most unsettling thing was that he didn't know if that destination was a place or something far worse. The train stopped suddenly with a screech that seemed to tear the air apart. David stood up, dizzy, and the doors opened slowly, revealing a dark platform, unnamed, unmarked, covered in dust and shadows. He stepped out, expecting to see a normal, though old, station, but what he found was something else. In front of him, a buried city, like something from an old, forgotten dream. The cobblestone streets were dimly lit by flickering lanterns. The houses, in styles he'd never seen before, looked abandoned, though their doors were open. David walked, uncertainly, exploring this impossible place. In the shop windows, ancient, rusted objects, like no one had touched them in years. Yet there was movement. Figures drifted slowly, like human shadows, but their faces were blurred, like warped reflections. He tried speaking to a woman passing nearby, but she didn't even look at him. Then a boy, holding a broken toy, stared at him for a few seconds, then vanished around a corner. Desperation began to swell in his chest. That's when a cold hand grabbed his arm. A woman with long hair, eyes that seemed to know him forever, whispered, "You shouldn't have come down. They already know you're here." David wanted to ask who they were, but when he turned to look, she was gone. Only the echo of her words remained, and the heavy certainty he had crossed a line no one spoke of, a boundary he was never meant to touch. And now, something was watching him from every corner. David ran aimlessly, trying to find a way out, a path back to the train, to the city, to anywhere but this silent nightmare. But every street, every turn, brought him back to the same spot, a plaza with a clock stuck at 12 sku. The city wasn't just old, it was a never-ending maze. The shadows seemed to stretch, as if the place were alive, breathing slowly, feeding off his fear. The lights flickered, and with each blink, the human figures seemed to multiply, watching him from afar. In one corner, he found a yellowed newspaper lying at the foot of a bench. He picked it up, and what he read froze his blood. The date, October 4th, 1979. The headline, "Passengers Vanish on Line 9. Authorities Investigate Sealed Tunnels." He looked down, and beneath the headline, a picture, a group of people, and among them, himself standing, the same face, the same clothes. He fell to his knees, trembling. How could he be in a photo from over 40 years ago? The streets began to shake, and a soft laugh like a child's filled the air. He ran to a shattered storefront and looked at himself in the glass. His reflection was distorted, aged, almost unrecognizable. He was no longer just a visitor, he was part of this place. Suddenly, the faces of the figures watching him became familiar. They were all him, repeated in different forms, trapped in an endless cycle. David screamed, but no one answered. Only the city, slowly closing in, as if it owned him. When all hope seemed gone, David saw a faint light at the end of a narrow alley. Without thinking, he ran toward it, dodging shadows that reached out, brushing his skin with a cold that pierced to the bone. His steps echoed on the cobblestones, but the city's silence stayed unbroken, as if waiting. When he reached the end, he found an old wooden door, carved with symbols he didn't understand. Pinned to it, a weathered note written in shaky letters: "Close your eyes, don't respond, walk." Shaking, David leaned against the door, which creaked open on its own. Beyond it, darkness. But he remembered the words, and without thinking further, closed his eyes. He took one step, then another. The voices began, soft at first, then louder. Familiar voices. His mother, his brother, his best friend, all calling him, begging, pleading for him to look, to help them. "David, don't leave us here." Each word was a blow, but he kept going. Something brushed his arm, then he felt a breath on his neck. He squeezed his eyes tighter until suddenly, silence. When he opened his eyes, he was standing alone on the empty platform of the main station in Detroit. Everything seemed normal, as if nothing had happened. The clock read 6 a.m., and the morning rush was just beginning. He went home, telling no one what had happened. But as he changed clothes, something fell from his pocket, an old yellowed subway ticket. On it, a single word, handwritten, marked. From that day, he never took the subway again. But every night when the clock strikes midnight, he hears the echo of a train arriving, just for him. There are places that, though forgotten by time, still wait. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone makes the mistake of going back. Let me tell you the story of Marcus, an ordinary man, a hard worker who never believed in superstitions or urban legends. For years, he took the train in Denver to get home, always the same route, the same routine. But one night, exhaustion and distraction led him down a path he should have never taken. That day, everything was delayed. Work, traffic, life. He arrived at the station just as the last train was leaving, and without thinking, he boarded the next one, not noticing the route was different. He closed his eyes for a moment, just wanting to rest. But when he opened them, the car was empty, and the train was stopping at a station he didn't recognize. The doors opened, and a cold wind hit him. He stepped off, curious, and as he looked at the sign, corroded by time, he read a word that made him frown: horizon. What the hell? That station had been closed for decades, according to the stories. People said strange things had happened there, things no one could explain. But Marcus didn't believe any of that, not until that night. If you enjoy horror stories, subscribe and turn on the bell, because sometimes an ordinary trip can lead you to a place from which there is no return. As the train left, abandoning him there, Marcus realized he had stepped into a place ruled by time and forgetfulness. He took a few steps onto the platform, eyes fixed on the details around him. Horizon Station looked like it was from another era, rusted iron benches, worn-out ads, and a silence so deep even his thoughts seemed too loud. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of old dampness, as if every corner hid years of neglect. He approached a wall map, barely visible, cracked and stained. There, a handwritten note caught his attention, hanging by a thread. "Closed due to unresolved anomalies." He frowned. Anomalies? What kind of anomalies? He figured there had to be a way out, an alternate exit. He walked down the main hall, noticing the lights flickering with his steps, as if they still held some life. At the end of the station, he found a slightly open metal door. He pushed carefully, the screech of metal breaking the silence. Inside, a small room filled with abandoned objects, a broken suitcase, an old coat, a stopped clock. On the floor, something more disturbing. Fresh shoe prints. Marcus felt a chill. Was someone else here? Suddenly, a sharp bang echoed from the tunnel. He turned, searching for the source, but saw nothing, just the reflection of his face in a cracked mirror. Or so he thought, because that reflection seemed to smile while he did not. Silence returned, but the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't just an empty station anymore. It was a place that waited, that held. And Marcus began to realize he wasn't as alone as he thought. He stepped back, heart racing, eyes still locked on the broken mirror. The smile in the reflection was gone, but the feeling lingered, like someone was watching from the other side. Then he heard it. "Son, where are you?" A soft, broken voice he knew too well. It was his mother's voice, gone for more than 5 years. Marcus froze, his mind struggling to make sense of the impossible. "Mom," he whispered without meaning to. The voice came again, closer from the dark tunnel stretching into the station's depths. "Marcus, come with me." Driven by a mix of fear and need, he moved toward the tunnel. Darkness surrounded him, but the voice guided him. Each step grew heavier, the air denser. Names began to appear on the walls, hastily carved. He lit the tunnel with his phone's flashlight and stopped when he saw a name. Marcus G., scratched in trembling letters. Beside it, a date, April 24th, the same day. The tunnel shook slightly, and a cold wind swept down his back. He turned, looking for an exit, but behind him, only darkness. Leaning on the wall, he felt a crack. He pushed, and part of the wall gave way, revealing a hidden room. Inside, old belongings, stopped watches, train tickets, suitcases. In a corner, a dust-covered notebook. He opened it and read, "No one leaves, all arrive." Marcus knew then that this place wasn't just a memory. It was a trap, fed by the voices of those who never returned. He shut the notebook with trembling hands. The air felt heavier, like every breath dragged him deeper into a bottomless pit. Outside, the tunnel remained dark, but now it wasn't just the absence of light. It was as if the darkness had shape, as if it wrapped around him. Determined not to stay, he left the room and ran through the station's halls. But every door was locked, every exit blocked. The signs, once showing directions, now displayed only confusing words, symbols he didn't understand. He reached the main vestibule, gasping, and in the distance saw a figure move. He shouted, begged for help, but as he got closer, he saw the figure was himself from behind. He froze. His other self vanished into a column, as if it had never been there. Then, a deep, older voice echoed from above. "You cannot run. This place already has you." The lights flickered violently, and the walls vibrated. Marcus stumbled, falling to the floor. When he looked up, the names on the walls surrounded him, all familiar, all his. In different forms, different years, they were all him. A tall man, his face blurred, approached slowly. He held a key, and his words were a whisper. "Accept your place, Marcus. There's no time here, only eternity." Marcus stood up, running toward the stairs leading back to the tunnel he had come from. But every step brought him back to the same spot. He ran and always returned to the vestibule. There was no way out, only repetition, only forgetting. When all seemed lost, Marcus tripped on something metallic. He knelt and saw a small door, hidden in the shadows, with a rusted sign, "Cross and forget," or "Remember and stay." Without thinking twice, he pushed the door with all his strength, feeling something pulling him back, trying to hold him. On the other side, a brighter tunnel with lighter air. He ran, not looking back, ignoring the voices calling him again, now more desperate. With each step, time seemed to break. His memories blurred, but something pushed him forward. Suddenly, a bright light blinded him, and when he opened his eyes, he was in his room, lying on his bed, drenched in sweat. He looked around. Everything seemed normal. The clock read 7 a.m. Had it all been a dream? He stood up slowly, heart still pounding, but as he moved, he felt something in his pocket. He pulled out an old, worn train ticket, stamped with a symbol he recognized instantly, Horizon Station. On the back, a handwritten note, "They always return." Since that day, Marcus never used the train again. But every time he passed near a station, the lights flickered, and in the reflection of the windows, sometimes, he swore he saw his face, watching him from the other side. And every night, as he closed his eyes, the distant sound of a train reminded him that, though he escaped, the station never forgets.